Okay, we're continuing with the book Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes by M.P. Rogers. We're doing Stanley Milgram. We're going in alphabetical order. This is the setup for the famous Stanley Milgram experiment. He's a psychologist, and it involves giving the learner a shock, an electric shock. So here's the experimenter who's in charge of the experiment, who's running the show. This is so it's E for experimenter, T is for teacher. The teacher person is the real subject of the experiment, to see how they respond to their instructions, their orders, so to speak, from the experimenter. The learner or the student is actually a confederate with the experimenter. So what's involved is it's supposed to be a training session that the student learns vocabulary, okay? And if they make a mistake, the teacher person is told to give them an electric shock. So as you push these buttons going from one end to the other, the electric shocks progressively increase in their intensity. They become more painful for the student. And what they were trying to figure out was how many shocks will the subject person give to the student learner person, depending on them being ordered by the experimenter. And what they were surprised to discover is that in about 65% of the teacher subject persons, they would go all the way to the maximum shock. They would simply be following orders. I was just following orders, whatever the experimenter told them to do. And that was sort of the sad discovery, was that the typical subject person, like a subordinate person in any type of institution, will do very bad things to the other person if they're just, whatever they're told, they'll just do it. So it's as if, they don't take responsibility for the action anymore. They see themselves simply as carrying out orders, so they don't feel accountable for their behavior, and they do terrible things to this other person. That happens in real life too, which is kind of sad. One of the things that I saw that gave me some hope, if you look at the Philippines with Marco, the previous dictator, he would tell, these people were sort of protesting, including nuns and stuff, and he would tell his soldiers in the Philippines to shoot them, okay? And they said, no, they're Christians. We're Christians. They're like our family. We're not going to do that. And Marcos had to abdicate, okay? And what I'm trying to tell you is Christianity gets people to be nice. That's why it's the most powerful thing to get people to do what's right and to not look down on others as being outside their group. To say, oh, we're all brothers in Christ, therefore, the brotherhood in Christ is dependent on the fatherhood. The brotherhood of man is dependent on the fatherhood of God. Okay, Toynbee is the first one who has said that. But anyways, Stanley Milgram lived from 1933 to 1984. These shock experiments were done at Yale. He wrote a book about it called Obedience to Authority, an Experimental View. Okay, so let's go through the quotes of Stanley Milgram. He says, if you control the manner in which a man interprets his world, then you have gone a long way towards controlling his behavior. Yeah, it's like the public schools are trained to turn you into a chump, to willingly destroy your own country. Okay, it is not so much the kind of person a man is as the kind of situation he finds himself in that determines how he will act. Yeah, and this also reminds one, of course, of B.F. Skinner, the idea that through behaviorism, rewards, and punishment, you could get people to do almost anything. You would be surprised. And I've always been a little surprised by that. Why would people abuse their own countrymen, okay, from their own ethnic group, their own religion? And they'll do it. They'll do it all over the world. And if they don't do it as aggressively enough, what the rulers do is they just bring in like a police force from another country. Like right now in England, they're hiring Muslims, from Pakistan to, be more abusive towards the English people. So they're aware of that and how it works. Okay, so anyways, let's continue here with the quotes by Stanley Milgram. He says, the disappearance of a sense of responsibility is the most far-reaching consequence of submission to authority. If you haven't seen these before, you can probably see them on YouTube. I know they're on the internet somewhere. A substantial proportion of people will do what they are told to do, irrespective of the content of the act, and without pangs of conscience, so long as they perceive the command comes from a legitimate authority. Okay, they never ask themselves, well, what determines the legitimacy of the authority? Okay, that's why you want Christianity. Would Christ approve of this? And it's obvious. No, Christ would not want you giving electric shocks to somebody, so you don't do it. Okay, a person comes to view himself as an instrument for carrying out another person's wishes, and he therefore no longer regards himself as responsible for his actions. It is easy to ignore responsibility when one is only an intermediate link in the chain of action. Ordinary people simply doing their jobs and without any particular hostility on their part can become agents in a terrible destructive process. Moreover, even when the destructive effects of their work become patently clear and they are asked to carry out actions incompatible with fundamental standards of morality, relatively few people have the resources needed to resist authority. Yeah, most people are pretty weak and they'll do whatever they're told to do. There's not many people who can say, hey, screw you, I'm not going to shock this guy, shove it up your ass. There's not many people that would do that. Okay, the gas chambers were built, death camps were guarded, daily quotes of corpses were produced with the same efficiency as the manufacture of appliances. These inhuman policies may have originated in the mind of a single person, but they could only have been carried out on a massive scale if a very large number of people obeyed orders. Okay, so he continues, Stanley Milgram. Something far more dangerous was revealed, the capacity for man to abandon his humanity, indeed the inevitability that he does so, as he merges his unique personality into a larger institutional structures. Okay, now is there any good news in this? Yes, about 35% of people wouldn't go all the way, and some people, many subjects did indeed choose to reject the experimenter's commands, providing a powerful affirmation of human ideals. Yeah, somebody told me to give someone else an electric shock. I'd say, screw you, why don't you shock yourself? This is BS. Anyways, that's Stanley Milgram's shock experiment.